Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
So that's the court. From where we're standing now, on our left, it's the old prison where political prisoners were kept, and on our right is then the new structure, the South African Constitutional Court. Constitution Hill, they wanted to create a space that looks both back and forward. So the one side is an old prison. The new structure is South Africa's Constitutional Court, which is the most forward-looking constitution in the world. So to try to give South Africans a sense of where they come from and what the Constitution allows and where they can go. So it's an interesting space. I mean, prominent names were held here, including Nelson Mandela himself, before he was shipped off to Robben Island. I think this is the last prison where he spent his time. But there's a full history of struggle heroes who were here. The struggle was bigger than one man. Not everyone has made it into the history books, but at least here you can get a sense of who was involved and some of the names.
We're kind of writing into existence, narratives that were erased. We're writing ourselves into history, and exposing a whole world and people, that were never thought to exist, or who the mainstream was quite happy to define as a kind of homogenous, oppressed black shame,
In the apartheid years, there was an immense moral pressure to deal with apartheid. If you wanted to write nice, gentle romances, that would be a mad endeavor to do that in a society that was under such extraordinary pressure. So there was an incredible pressure to kind of witness to what was happening and write against it. That pressure has been relieved, and I think that's a good thing.
I'm going to try and take you on a journey to give you a flavor and small insights into what is happening in South African literature 20 years into democracy. The new voices that have come out, the themes that they're writing about. We will speak to both young writers and older seasoned writers to try and get a sense of this current phase in South African literature. My name is Thabiso Mohare. I am 33 years old. I'm a writer, spoken word artist, an arts entrepreneur, and I'm a general dreamer and good guy, I think.
Every child, my child, is wrapped in a ribbon of rhythm. Every child, my child, is wrapped in a ribbon of rhythm. Every child, my child, is wrapped in a ribbon of rhythm, wrapped in a ribbon of rhythm, wrapped in a ribbon of rhythm.
My name is Lebo Mashile. I'm 36 years old. I've lived in Johannesburg now for 20 years, at least in this stint of my life.
Every child, my child, is wrapped in a ribbon of rhythm, wrapped in a ribbon of rhythm, wrapped in a ribbon of rhythm. Every child, my child, honors this life we've been given. Our future hangs on the present's legacies. Life is a puzzle held.
I became the face of poetry for a while in South Africa. I'm not sure if I still am. I'm not sure if I still want to be. I don't think that there's any other place in the world that would allow me to be the person that I am and do the work that I do other than South Africa in this particular moment of history. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. My parents left South Africa. They met in the US as Sowetans, started a family there. There's something really unique about this context. As dysfunctional as it is, as exhausting as it is, it's transformative, and it allows for conversations that are not possible anywhere else.
I know for a fact that, for example, Ribbon of Rhythm was an influential book to young people. Some young people went through high school because of that book. Some young people took pieces from it and turned that into their grade 12 assignments and the black female voice, especially within now this free South Africa. How prevalent, what role is it playing?
I think the emergence of black female writers is one of the most important creative movements and shifts to have happened in the last 20 years. There are more black women who have published books, of poetry, of fiction in the last 20 years than in 50 years or 100 years before, you know? I think because the voices of women were so strongly marginalized and pushed out, you know, it's like taking the lid off of a pressure cooker, you know, and then everything comes flying out, right, including the voices of women.
Blessed are those guided by words woven with a ribbon of rhythm. Every child should know the hands that receive them. In that instant, believe them to be the perfection that will fulfill their greatest destiny. My child will know deception and rage can be converted to pages, where reality can heal in the realm of fantasy. Every child should know that they are a gift.
Sometimes I think it's a microcosm of the entire planet and the issues of, you know, like it's all, if you distill it all, it's all here. But the wonderful thing about South Africa is that it's all on the table, you know. Race is on the table, gender is on the table. But I mean, you feel it in Johannesburg, you know. You don't drive a block without having to ask yourself, how do I feel about cops and policing? How do I feel about the opportunities that exist for young people? How do I feel about the fact that this is a young nation and a young continent? How do I feel about corruption? How do I constantly, the space forces you to self-examine, and the space doesn't allow you to take your voice out of it. Your voice immediately impacts the space and is immediately impacted by the space, and I love that.
So I think your perspective is interesting, because living in the US and then coming here and then now having to re-engage with your heritage. Do you have any memories of 1994?
It was strange, you know. 1990 happened, Mandela coming out of jail and the unbanning of the ANC and all of that began the process of us transitioning back. So we would come, thunder!
Nothing grows here except skyscrapers and neon flowers that rise and wither with the daily sun, watered by acid rain, pain and human strain, where day, night and season are all but the same. Basement roots, elevator stems, petals are paper. This is a garden of buildings where the harvest is not for everyone. I think around 2000 it was a nice time when a lot of young people were coming out, a lot of new voices, a lot of books that were previously not available were now available. You know, so I got caught up in that world. So in 2001, I was 19. I decided I'm going to move to Johannesburg and pursue a career as a writer. And I've been in the city ever since then. I think Johannesburg, as it redevelops, as it gets new influences, for me it's an interesting space for a writer. Constitution Hill, where we were just now, is a kind of reclamation of haunted space. From there, it's not far to Braamfontein, where I take a walk with Ivan Vladislavich. In his writing over the past 20 years, he has reflected South Africa's political and social transformation through the shifting architecture and changing urban landscape of Johannesburg. Well, this is Braamfontein. A lot of it feels like Cape Town, like, you know, that hipster market. But you've known it longer, definitely.
Well, I was at university in the 70s, in the early 70s.
In his book, Portrait with Keys, Ivan invites the reader on various journeys through Johannesburg which he has walked and observed over time, including the inner city Hillbrow area, where he used to work as an editor for Raven Press. In a time when non-whites were severely repressed by the government, Raven Press became an important avenue through which dissident voices could be heard.
Try to imagine whether something like this could happen in Hillbrow. And I think one of the things that perhaps counts against this sort of development is that it's an incredibly dense high-rise area.
Right,
and you have a lot of relatively poor people living there, which is a good thing because poor people need accommodation in the city.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a fair number of buildings around here where people were living in what had been office buildings. And those people have been displaced.
Right. This is a coffee shop.
Shall we get some coffee? Would you like some?
A stranger, arriving one evening in the part of Joburg I call home, would think that it had been struck by some calamity, that every last person had fled. There is no sign of life. Behind the walls, the houses are ticking like bombs. The curtains are drawn tight, the security lights are glaring, the gates are bolted. Even the cars have taken cover. Our stranger, passing fearfully through the streets, whether in search of someone with open hands of whom he might ask directions, or merely of someone to avoid in the pursuit of solitude, finds no one at all. The range of steering locks available in South Africa is impressive. The Wild Dog, the Motorquip anti-theft lock, the Twist lock, the SL2 auto lock.
Johannesburg is one of those places that really does draw people from other parts of the country. So it's a city of recent arrivals, which is an exciting thing about it.
And picking up on the theme of walking in the city, we've just walked through Braamfontein now, and you were giving us a history or a sense of history of Braamfontein, where it comes from, how it's transformed. Can you still do that in Johannesburg? You know, does it still allow you that space as a writer to interact with the city, to feed off it?
Well, I think it's hard in Johannesburg. My book, Portrait with Keys, is very much about that relationship. It's about walking in the city and being on the streets and seeing what's happening down at street level, which is, I think, where cities happen. I find it harder. I find that Johannesburg, it's become more insular in that the model has become areas of development which are like islands, and between that is a space that's very difficult to negotiate.
We are overlooking Johannesburg. To our far right, just behind the Constitutional Court, is Hillbrow, the legendary Hillbrow. The court, or this space, works as a divide between the old Yeoville Hillbrow area and the new Braamfontein area. And it's interesting to notice the contrast both in quality of life and structures and development. It's also a place of two sides. You've got the good Hillbrow and you've got the very dark and labeled bad Hillbrow, crime, drugs, but people are still living there. People are still making a life there. They're raising children there. But maybe the city is not too focused on it. They're looking at other sides.
Hillbrow was always my favorite part of the city. So we spent a lot of time in Hillbrow, in the continental cafes and in the bookshops and in the record shops. Records were round plastic, black plastic things. Johannesburg soundtrack.
One of your books, The Restless Supermarket, is set in Hillbrow, 1993. Democracy coming in, the space starting to change as well, the influences that came in.
It was also one of the first places that began to open up to other people and to become a non-racial space.
Right.
In the terminology of the time, it became a grey area. And it felt, for a period of a few years, like a model of what South Africa was going to be. For me, the high point was around 1991, 92, 93. Hillbrow had an extraordinarily dynamic culture, and it felt like a vision of the future city. And then sadly what happened is that the social dynamics being what they are in South Africa, with people's sense of being threatened by other people, wanting to be in their own space and so on, there was a sort of white flight out of Hillbrow. And then, of course, there was a further development where many local black Joburgers moved out and it became an almost entirely immigrant black area. And there's a certain continuity in that Hillbrow had always been a place where immigrants came. I guess it was that feeling of Hillbrow as a very changeable space that drew me to it as a subject for the book, because you could see these big social changes happening in a very confined area.
These streets have lips. They speak of a man trying to move a rock, hoping a mountain will follow. Of a woman dancing in a rain of bullets, trying to salvage joy amidst the sorrow. They speak stolen moments in the hands of exile, lives torn at the seams. If only God was willing, I would paint portraits of life, tragedy in different shades of pink. I would arrange heartbreak in sync with heartbeats. If only God was willing, these streets would make instead of break. They would give instead of take, yet they willingly give false illusions to any soul seeking the pot of gold at the end of the neon lights. These streets wear different masks, and to some they give bread. To some they give wisdom, and to others misery instead. Another patron is dead seems to be the daily anthem. Will these streets ever tell the truth about the young vocalist they take with them? We all drum to the rhythm played by the streets, chant to the chorus sung by the streets, dig for treasures buried in the streets with open palms. We fight to catch crumbs thrown by the streets. They speak.
Basani and Pear's book, Welcome to Our Hillbrow. It comes out at almost exactly the same time as my book, The Rest is Supermarket. And they're actually very interesting books to look at together. My novel is describing the end of a particular lifestyle and people moving out of the world of continental Hillbrow and white Hillbrow. And his book is describing the arrival of a younger, different black community into Hillbrow. So the books sort of interlock. But what struck me about his book, he's not interested in what was there before. And that's the stuff that really interests me.
A very short distance later, you join Curtis Street. You turn right to face the west. Cousin stops you. If you want it, he says, Riley, you can go into this building. It's called Quirinal. Or if you prefer, you can head on to the very end of Curtis, he continues. You see those green, yellow, and red lights dancing? That is Chelsea. One semi-naked soul comes out of Quirinal, and Cousin's point is made. So you do not ask him, as you had meant to, what it was.
I think there is a growing body of work about place. I would include something like Nick Mhlongo's work. His early books especially have a very strong flavor of Johannesburg. In fact, the first one, Dog Eat Dog, has a strong flavor of this neighborhood because it's a university story. It's about being a student in this part of town.
The New York Times called you the spokesperson of the Kwaito generation.
Did I say so? Kwaito music was the most important medium amongst black people to express themselves, to express their freedom, their newly acquired freedom. I couldn't have chosen anything except the Kwaito music. My name is Nick Mhlongo. I was born and raised in Soweto. I grew up, I'll say, in Orlando West, along Vilakazi Street. People know it as the place where two Nobel laureates come from. That's Nelson Mandela and former Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So that's where I grew up, actually.
The first ever book I bought with my own money.
Yeah.
When I was like, okay, let's do this be a writer thing.
Yeah.
It was Dog Eat Dog.
Oh, is it? Oh, thanks, man. Small one.
Dog Eat Dog, published in 2004, deals with the story of a Soweto student struggling to fit into a new world at the University of the Witwatersrand, also known as WITS.
The most thing that I remember well about 1994 was the fact that we voted, and I participated in the vote. I stood in the queue for about 4 hours, voting for Mandela. So I think it's one of the things that made me want to share this experience through Dog Eat Dog, because it's mostly talks about those issues of uncertainty, those issues of having this new freedom, how to deal with it.
I mean, it's interesting that we are sitting, inside this university.
Yes.
Can you talk us through Dog Eat Dog and for you writing it and the atmosphere of the country that's happening?
There was this euphoria which was about we have to vote for a black government because of the promises that they made. So during my time, it was like these were the promises that were made by a person who everybody was respecting, who was Nelson Mandela, and we knew that whatever he said, he will fulfill them, unlike the leaders today.
I was born about 22 kilometers outside of Johannesburg, in a place called Katlehong, the East Rand. It's a township. In the 80s, it was the hotspot between ANC, African National Congress, and the Inkatha Freedom Party factions, which were masked as ethnic factions or tribal factions, if you want to call it that, whereas it was a bit more political than that. So I grew up in that environment. When the violence started escalating, we then moved to one of the homelands for about 5-6 years.
I think, like Don Matera says, memory is a weapon, you know? I think it's hard to live in a society like South Africa and not be affected by the things that happen to us, by our inherited legacies. This is a violent society. This is an unequal society. This is a massively corrupt society. But this is also an incredibly free society because you can stand here on the BBC and say this, and I'm not gonna die because I'm saying it. I'm not gonna be arrested because I'm saying it, you know? We've got to make peace with where we come from and with who we come from, you know? It also lives in us, you know, that toxicity, that violence, all of that is alive within us too. And I believe that the creative landscape, that inner excavation that you do when you write, you know, it forces you to confront parts of yourself.
I think for my family, the last straw was the night when they were going door to door. So Inkatha Freedom Party was rounding up firstborn sons in the township and killing them. And that night they got into a house, and my mom then dressed my brother up as girls and hid us in the house and prayed and begged and hoped that we don't make a noise. We didn't. And the following day, she packed bags and she took us to my grandfather's place in Buputatswana, which was a homeland back then, you know, a farm area. And that's where I spent 5 years. So there was always tension. There was always people on guard. With the young people, they would organize sort of security groups, and they would monitor and keep watch overnight. And, you know, you grew up hearing gunshots in the night. Following morning, you hear stories of who passed away, somebody got shot. And, you know, I think as a child at that time, you know, it's bits and pieces that are happening. You're still not getting a full picture. It's only when you're much older that you sort of see, okay, you realize what was going on and the kind of impact it has had on your life as well.
There is emerging a renewed interest in the past from young writers. Nick Mhlongo's book, in Way Back Home, the unsavory past of what happened in the ANC's camps is being brought to the surface. So I think that's maybe a new and I think very positive development of young writers looking in a much more critical way at our fairly recent history.
So it's almost like the past battling with the present.
That's actually the essence of Way Back Home. Like, for instance, my main character is a person who comes from the struggle. Most of the things that we are seeing in South Africa today are happening because these people they come from exile. It's an environment of brutality. Because imagine being in an environment whereby you have to sleep next to a gun. You have to feel the weight of a gun, and then now you find the weight of money on your pocket. It's quite a different kind of weight, you know. And then psychologically it damages you. So I think my book, for instance, is mostly about how much cleansing do we need.
This is one of the challenges of writing in South Africa now, and of living here. How to imagine a way forward without ignoring the legacy of the past, the shadow of apartheid. Umkhonto weSizwe, or the MK, was the military wing of the African National Congress and was tasked with achieving an armed resistance against apartheid. Kimati, the main character of Way Back Home, is a former MK fighter once exiled and now back home and dealing with demons from his past.
For the whole time that he had been in the clinic, Kimati had not opened his eyes once. But in his dim and troubling nightmare, he'd had the vision of a familiar woman. "What is your name?" he asked, looking directly into her face. "It seems your memory betrays you, comrade." She smiled briefly and became serious again. "I must help to refresh it for you." He tried to seize her by the throat, but he was too late. "Are you trying to harm me again, comrade?" the woman asked. "You must learn to remember your enemies by the scars you inflict on them," said the woman, pointing at the scar on her left cheek. "It is your choice that charted my path of tragedy."
Unlike the white communities, we don't believe in shrinks, you know. We have seen quite a lot in exile. You have seen people dying, and then all of a sudden they say it's democracy. Because you were there, here's the stake for you. What do you do with it? You know, you don't have human relations. You haven't been cleansed before properly, you become a leader, and then your actions, because you are haunted by that past, it's reflecting.
There's still a lot of houses that were burned down. There's still a lot of houses with blood on the walls that have not been broken down. There's still a lot of abandoned houses. There's still a lot of physical memory within the East Rand of what happened, and very little has been done to either to rejuvenate that area or to even tell some of the stories. Thousands and thousands of people died, and that story has sort of lurked in the shadows. So it too has been the global brand in terms of what South African townships are like, and that's the story that South Africa has been publicizing to the world. The focus and energy in redeveloping Soweto has produced a different township, but whereas on the other side, in the East Rand, nothing has happened. So it's two worlds again. So yeah, that's the space I grew up in.
The books that shaped my consciousness were banned in my parents' time, so even just the access to information, the tools that I've used to develop my inner world, people had to die for me to have access to those tools, so of course our leaders are corrupt, of course the society is violent, of course we rape each other, of course we beat each other up, of course we elevate mediocrity, of course we silence people. Yes, I mean, that's what traumatized people do, So the work of being free is probably, it's the most important work that we'll do ever.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.